Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Dr. James Kelley, Chief Medical Officer at Pictor Labs and a long-time leader in lab medicine and diagnostics. We explore how AI is reshaping pathology, why virtual staining could be a game changer, and what every clinician needs to know about data ownership in the age of algorithms. If you're curious about the future of diagnostics, this one's for you. Welcome to the show, James. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this week.
Thanks for having me, David.
Good. I've been really excited about talking to you about this because one of the things that we've sort of planned to talk about around AI and AI in pathology, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of hype. There's also a lot of capital. So it's not just hype. There's a lot of money following it. So I think we've got a really interesting topic, or a few topics to discuss today. But before we do that, it would be great to understand a bit more about you and your background and who you are.
Sure, appreciate it. Well, my name's James Kelley, originally from a small town in Alabama. I have a PhD in immunology and informatics from the University of Cambridge, so spent some time in England. I did my medical degree and then clinical training in pathology, both in clinical pathology and then transfusion medicine, which is blood banking in the Harvard system. So I was at Brigham and Women's and then Mass General. I was on faculty at MD Anderson Cancer Center for several years, where I sort of peaked my career there as director of laboratory medicine. After that, I went and joined industry, where I worked for Terumo Blood and Cell Technologies, which is a medical device company that makes apheresis equipment, things for like blood collection, stem cell collections, cellular therapy, processing type equipment. After some time being an evidence generation physician in that organization, I was the chief medical officer at OneOme, which is a Mayo Clinic spinoff that focuses on pharmacogenomic testing. So a lot of coming up with programs for payers, employers, health systems to help people optimize the medications they're on and make sure that it's genetically tailored to the way their body would metabolize it. For about the past 6 weeks, I've been chief medical officer at Pictor Labs, which is a UCLA spinoff that really focuses on bringing virtual staining and having virtual staining technology fit into that overall digital pathology workflow.
Wow! So you've been in and around pathology from the early parts of your career, and now right at the forefront of something it's the innovation in pathology.
I think it's exciting to see a field actually, adopt new technologies and go from what's always traditionally been there, and still fundamentally offering the same services, while being able to expand how you do it and have new methodologies.
Is pathology then? I'm just going straight into this now. Pathology feels like it's a part of the industry that is benefiting the most, and almost like it's tangible in terms of the AI adoption, and where we are now around this AI buzz. It feels like pathology is like right in the top spot of AI has come in, and it's just revolutionizing where pathology is used and its outcomes.
Well, if you think about pathology and laboratory medicine in general, it drives different figures, but let's say 70 to 80% of all clinical data comes from the laboratory. From your blood results to your pathology slides, all of that data feeds into your diagnostics. Because if you can't diagnose appropriately what a disease is, it's very difficult for physicians and surgeons to then decide how to treat it appropriately. So with such a bulwark, the bolus of the data that's used in clinical decision making coming from the lab, it makes data and technology tools that harness data, I think, all the more applicable.
All right. So Pictor Labs. Before we touch more into the science, Pictor Labs. You said you've only been there 6 weeks, so I'm sure you're now really well versed on everything about them. Who are Pictor Labs?
So Pictor Labs is a company that's really trying to push forward the digital pathology workflow, in the sense that if you want to take a traditional glass slide as we move to digital pathology, you're digitizing those images. So taking a whole slide image scanners to take a picture of it so that pathologists can read it on a computer screen, much the way radiology digitized several years ago, in the sense of used to have just films, X-ray films, and now it's all on a computer screen from your scanners. So as pathology moves to that, we really need to find a way to move the entire workflow into a digital environment, in the sense that currently, when you have a biopsy, you have a piece of tissue removed after a surgery, they can make the glass slide, but then they have to actually chemically stain it. So they dip it in different chemicals so that it enhances the properties of cell structure or certain molecules in the surface of cells to bring them out, to make it easier for a pathologist or the treating physician to actually see those features and know what they're looking at. What we do at Pictor is when we take the unstained image or an H&E stained image, we can actually use computer algorithms to apply a virtual stain to it. So it eliminates the need to actually do the chemical staining for it anymore. You can actually start moving the entire workflow into a digital environment. And that's going to save time, save costs, save environmental impact. What I think most importantly is a value proposition is that it solves what we call a QNS, or a quantity not sufficient issue. So if you go to the idea of, let's say you take out a biopsy of someone's tissue, very small piece, very limited. And if you want to make multiple stains, multiple slides out of that, you're going to have to use up all your tissue for that diagnosis. But now, with virtual staining, you can take that one slide and make as many stains as you can conceive of, because we've got the ability to just do that all in a computerized, digitized manner. And that then saves that tissue that can be scraped off and used for molecular testing or other diagnostics, or just be saved for perpetuity for additional research or later investigation.
The transfer to digital staining, does it have the same accuracy as the physical previously, or is there any sort of loss of accuracy or ability of the I guess the impact and utilization of the staining? Is there any loss in terms of when that's transferred to a digital process?
So we're still in a research and development phase for part of it. I should be clear too that our products are not cleared by the FDA at this point.
Yeah.
But what we are doing is, if we're going to put a product in clinical use, it's going to have to be non-inferior to the traditional method. So we have some stains that perform as well, and we have some that are still in development. But our end goal before having it out for actual patient use is it will be non-inferior, at least in its diagnostic accuracy to what you would have in traditional staining.
Yeah, interesting. So it has to uphold that standard. So the company is in development stage at the moment. Sorry, go on.
So yeah, we do have products in more of an RUO basis that biopharma is using when it's not for direct patient diagnostics currently. Yeah. But we are working towards having a clinical use product.
Okay, makes sense. And so the problem it's solving, you have this issue on obviously the amount of times that you can use a specific biopsy in a piece of tissue and so forth. What about the end patient? What are the biggest benefits that they're going to see from this sort of revolution in the technology?
I think from a patient perspective, it'd be more on the turnaround time. So with traditional staining, your pathologist will look at your H&E original stain, then will order what special stains, or maybe have standing orders to do that. But someone has to physically go stain it and then bring it back. Whereas, so you're talking at least hours, if not a day or so, to get that result back. Whereas with virtual staining, you're talking about 20 minutes of computational time to crank the result and have it right back to you. So if you're a patient waiting for a diagnosis, that day, while it may not impact your treatment outcome, to you emotionally having to sit and wait for that is a big deal. It also opens up to things like frozen sections, or perhaps looking at melanoma for Mohs surgery. There's things where currently special stains or immunohistochemistry would be very useful if you could have the results in a more immediate impact rather than having to wait for it. Because if you're in the middle of a surgery and they take a piece of tissue into a frozen section, to get an immediate assessment of what tissue, what the margins are, what the diagnosis is, what you're looking at. To be able to have all your stains come out in just a few minutes gives that pathologist and surgeon in real time a lot better idea of what's happening. So I think there's a lot of applications in the future that could really impact patient care and or patient experience to make it better for them.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned obviously there's an AI element to it in terms of the process itself and how it's developing these the virtual staining. Do you have you been working in and around AI previously and been exposed to what's been your exposure so far to AI in the pathology space? At Alevra Consulting, we focus on DX only, supporting early stage and growth companies achieve their milestones by solving their biggest talent challenges. Have you ever suffered from working with a talent partner who was either life sciences or med tech and dabbling in diagnostics? Or no more? Work with a diagnostics specialist talent partner.
Sure. So I worked on an AI project back when I was at MD Anderson where we had an issue where patients would have transfusion reactions. So you have a blood product and then could develop a fever or allergic. All these things can happen because you're being exposed to basically a tissue transplant from someone else. Someone else's blood is entering your body. So what we would do there is we took, MD Anderson tends to transplant or transfuse more blood than any other center. So we had tremendous amounts of data. And we could look across hundreds of thousands of transfusions to see what features and what factors would predispose you to having a reaction, and would analyze that down so that we could, in the future, identify patients most at risk and take action in advance to keep them from having a negative outcome. So I was involved on the more medical side of helping develop those protocols and developing the information of how to do that. One of the things that I think that leads a discussion around with pathologists is it's not necessary to be an AI expert in the sense that, I'm never going to sit down there and do the coding or whatever the people doing all their computer screens. It is useful to be a translator of that information. So understand enough about the process and machine learning and how things come about that I can help put that in a biological context or a medical context so that it actually can impact patient care. And so back at MD Anderson doing that type of project or now working at Pictor, I think that's the fundamental thing for pathologists and diagnosticians to keep up with is just enough awareness that you can help make the tools useful for you in your practice, but help translate them into new ways to be helpful for patients and practices everywhere.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it, James? Because I think I think that's a big question mark for everybody, especially people that it doesn't even matter if you're at the end of your career, even if you're in the sort of beyond 10 years out of bachelor degree level, how much do you need to know about AI when it's having a huge impact on your industry? Not everybody can expect to suddenly become an AI engineer, a data scientist, or something else. But there is a responsibility to understand the start point, end point, and the purpose of what AI and machine learning is doing for the products, right? How does that transfer to physicians that are being asked to implement new AI empowered technology, and do you feel like from the utilization side that there's an open-mindedness, or is there, because some healthcare systems take long to convince them about anything, right? Let alone this new AI ML version of what you used to do before. How is it being received by sort of key opinion leaders?
I would say it's mixed. I've seen some studies that say it takes 17 years for physicians to adopt a practice.
Wow.
And that, with anything, it's a new drug that comes to market. Think about, robotic surgery. A lot of surgeons didn't really want to adopt that at first, and then some do, some don't. Some patients have preferences. So I think AI is going to be very similar in the sense that there are going to be early adopters, and then there are going to be people that lag. And it may depend on just your willingness to adopt and look at new technology, learn new things. And yeah, I think it just going to depend on your personal preference.
Yeah. What did you, on a personal level, what have you done sort of things off your own accord to try and be more exposed to where the AI side of pathology is going and try and learn about it and read about it and stuff like that?
Well, dude, I think, you look at, Harvard, MIT, a lot of these schools have these executive programs
Yeah.
where you can just go on YouTube and like, bootleg some classes just to learn some basics, the vocabulary, just an understanding so that I can have communications with AI engineers, or at least I'm up to date enough that I can, have intelligent conversations and have a better understanding. Like, I don't ever intend to be an AI expert, but
Right.
I know enough to make a meaningful contribution. And I
Yeah.
think just getting that extra education is, I mean, extra education, anything can always be useful.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of is it stubbornness? I think there's a reluctance. So there's obviously groups of people who they just don't even know where to start with it, right? And it's impacting their industry over and over. And I think they're probably the same people that fear its impact on their industry. The ones that are choosing not to sort of spend that time to just raise their own awareness. Do you feel that there's in pathology and in pathologists specifically that there is that same concern that we sort of hear the scare stories of, oh, AI is going to replace our jobs and stuff
Mhm.
like this? Is that a real concern in the industry?
I think it is, among certain individuals and certain people, it's not. I frequently hear across industries the comment that AI is not going to replace your job, but professionals who adopt AI will. And I
Yeah.
think it's something that it's a new emerging technology, a skill set that's, a benefit to you. One way I think about it too is as physicians, you know, finance, for example, just basic accounting principles are not taught in medical school. Through your, 4-year bachelor degree and then medical school and residency training, we're never really taught, finance, marketing, all the business aspects. But that has a
Yeah.
tremendous
Yeah.
impact on your success as a physician to make sure that you're making your margins, you actually get paid, your staffing is appropriate, all those operational concerns. So that's information that you need to go out and sort of learn on your own. And I think AI is much the same. It's just a new technology that you can choose to, if it's going to benefit your personal career, embrace and learn what you can. I mean, I think there's always going to be those concerns that something new can replace your job, new technology, younger people, but again, it's just being adaptable and still contributing. I think that experience that a pathologist has is invaluable to actually look at tissue and understand what it means, put that in a clinical context. I don't think a machine's just going to pick that up and replace it overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. As a chief medical officer in the space, do you see your role changing as these new developments are coming in?
I think it changes the way I do work. Like, to me, it makes my job much more easier and efficient in the sense that, like, for example, as a chief medical officer, I have to write a scientific communication plan where I need to come up with all the publications, conference presentations for the next year that, and oversee the team of medical affairs and people to go execute those. Whereas that would be, a multi-week process. I can basically have one of the AI engines write that for me. And then I've generally found it to be about 90% accurate because there are errors in there.
Yeah.
And I just go back and fix it. So now something that was a 20-hour job is a 2-hour job, which frees me up more time to do other things. So I think it's impacting me in that way most often.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of AI in pathology, we've touched on this, previously, and it was an interesting topic that you raised in terms of the data side of it and
Mhm.
the ownership of that data. Give us a bit of an overview of how how AI's role in the workflow and its ownership of data and where that sits, how that's impacting change?
Sure. And I think it may be fundamentally a larger question about medical data ownership than just AI. The thing about
Right.
AI is it's now enabled us to be able to consume and ingest large amounts of data and make meaningful inferences from it. But I think these same issues existed before. If we look back at some genomic testing, for example, you always feel like the patient owns their genomic data, but then it's really that they have access to it. So when I start looking from my perspective of startup companies, both in the genomics world and now at Pictor, when we're looking at virtual staining, it's who owns the rights to that because data has value. So let's say you have a genomic test. You have the patient's genomic sequence and it comes from a hospital or health system. And then there's a company that is going to aggregate, hundreds, thousands, millions of patients' data that can then be analyzed for drug development or new research or hypothesis generation. Well, who owns the right to that data? Is it the patient? Is it the health system that actually originated that? Is it the company that's aggregating the data and doing some analysis? So I think there's a lot of issues there where companies are getting their samples for testing from health systems, and you're seeing in contracts of who's going to own it, but you can't really parse it out. In the sense, if you're going to do, you're going to aggregate 1 million genomic samples, well, you can't we're going to exclude from University X because they want to own the rights to it. And the reason the university wants to own the rights to it is because it has financial value.
Right.
Look at a lot of the large major research academic centers now have chief data officers or chief data analytics officers that are really focused on how can they harness that. If I go back to my time at MD Anderson, they've got that whole infrastructure in place with both leadership and tools around the millions of cancer patients they treat every year, learning what they can from it, learning from their diagnostics, their pathology, their lab results, their medications they're on, their outcomes, to see how they can figure out ways to drive the field forward and learn what's the best approaches, what had the best outcomes, and be able to disseminate that information. But it also has the ability to look at what molecules might be good targets for drug development, or what programs are the most financially lucrative, for industry to adopt. So they certainly don't want to give away the rights to that data by giving out to another organization. I think a good example might be 23andMe, for example, that was recently acquired by Regeneron. Well,
Right.
it's not, I'm assuming here, but I don't think that the pharma company really wanted 23andMe for their operational functions. They were
Yeah.
after that data from the millions of people. They were after the, buccal swabs and spit samples and everything that they had that could be used for future research. And so who really owns that? Is it the patient? When you start now taking companies like mine where the information is being referred from health centers, who owns that information and therefore the financial value of it? Is it the health system? Is it the patient? Is it the company? And I think those are both legal issues and contractual issues and ethical issues that the field's going to have to sort out.
And then is AI multiplying that problem because its ability to analyze data quickly and in bulk is obviously something that up until not a very long ago that suddenly becomes so much more valuable. I think 23andMe has something like 13 million
A lot.
subscribers or what customers, whatever you'd call it, which is a lot, right? So you suddenly have access to this data that you're giving to a huge company with huge amounts of capital to deploy, and you let AI loose on that. It's surely the ability to suddenly turn that into trend analysis or spot things and so forth, and then the outcome of that data or the conclusion of that data, what's happening, is AI just is it's creating a problem by ultimately it's accelerating everybody's ability to utilize data and then create new data from the data it's consuming.
Yes, I think it's just accelerating our potential for advancement faster than we've had the time to figure out some fundamental questions. on ethics, ownership. And it's not just related to pathology or medicine. There's court cases now about AI and machine learning training itself on published works and artworks. And I think a court ruled just a few weeks ago that if someone bought the book, then they have the rights to put it into their AI algorithm. So there's all these, just issues in general of who owns information, who owns data, who owns ideas, and who has a right to a new synthesis of that, or a derivative work that AI may generate.
How does that impact a company like Pictor Labs and other companies that are coming into the field with new AI-enabled technology into the pathology space, which ultimately you're not doing the biopsies, right? So, you know, how does that impact, or is there a lack, is there a lack of regulation now that in a short term is a benefit to Pictor Labs, but actually you can see that at some point there needs more definition here.
Well, I think right now it's just sort of devolve down to a contractual agreement between the parties, in the sense that when I think of the example of virtual staining in Pictor Labs, if the actual slide image that we get, is a patient's tissue,
Yeah.
but it likely belongs to the health system or whoever collected that. However, I would view, just my opinion, that the aggregation of those. So if we take, from 36 health systems, 2 million whole slide images and do an analysis on it to look for structural differences that may drive some drug development in the future, that probably belongs to Pictor, because we're the ones who did the analysis from an aggregate. And there's no real way for us to parse out, well, 18% of it came from slides from University X, therefore they should have this financial cut. Because also I don't think, it's not as if the university is then going to turn around and say, well, of our 18%, we owe $12 to Mrs. Jones because that was her tissue and really belongs to her. I haven't heard that discussion either. So I think it's just going to be how people work it all out. From a commercial standpoint of selling products into health systems, I think the health system is probably not going to do business with companies unless they retain their data rights. So I think that's always going to be there. And, my approach would be to just be very clear about that. The health system owns the rights to the images in their slide. But I also think we don't want to lose the ability to do those aggregate analysis across multiple entities and have some derivative work, or else we're not going to go forward.
Is this a topic of discussion that's being discussed at a regulatory level?
Not that I've heard specifics on it. It should be. I think there's a lot of regulatory flux in the U.S. right now and elsewhere. I know the EU AI Act is coming out, or has come out, and is looking to be implemented in the short term. That puts a bit more structure around this. Canada had a pretty rigorous. I think their parliament's looking at some AI legislation currently. So there are things out there to try to go around this, but I think it's still developing where the field wants to settle.
Yeah, I always feel like, and this is a sweeping generalization, whenever the first set of regulatory structure comes out with new technology, what tends to happen is the rate and pace that private industry is innovating is so fast. And in AI, I mean, it feels faster than ever, right? There seems to be new tech replacing tech that we thought was new just merely a couple of years ago. They're innovating so fast that by the time regulatory bodies catch up and are able to formalize, agree and formalize something and then distribute it, it's so out of date that it's just not always fit for purpose. And then they spend so much time trying to catch up, and ultimately, it's there, but it never really serves as much purpose as they hope it would. And I feel like with AI, I feel most regulatory bodies, regardless of what region it is, whether it's US, Canada, UK, Europe, who are they getting to write these AI frameworks, and how much do they actually know about what's coming out, what's being innovated, what's being utilized, and so forth, and is it actually going to be fit? I think it's. I'm not criticizing them whatsoever. I just think they've got an incredible challenge on their hands to to bring something that is actually really constructive and at the forefront of what's happening and what AI is being used for. It's an uphill struggle for them.
It is because it's complex, which I'll pivot back to something I was talking about earlier as being a translator for AI. I think that's where pathologists or physicians in general can actually offer a tremendous amount. Is we've been trained, we have a very in-depth clinical and scientific knowledge, and we understand how it impacts patients in real life. So if we take the effort to learn enough about AI to be able to translate that we can then talk to the policymakers and go to comment periods and go to regulators to say, this is what actually makes sense in the real life, rather than letting, tech people make the rules for how it's going to impact medicine. I think this is an opportunity for physicians in the healthcare industry really to take charge of how AI works in healthcare. But to do it, you have to understand enough about AI to have a positive contribution to that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And then it's ultimately down to can people in your position and otherwise, do they have the time, desire, and to be involved? And does the regulatory board see reaching out and having those connections and perspectives from people in private industry to come and help drive, or do they have that sort of unnecessary stubbornness where they think they know what's best and they create a policy that's just wide at the mark? Who knows? You just never know which way it's going to go with government, unfortunately.
That's where professional organizations, I think, can join. Things like the College of American Pathologists is a very strong lobbying group, and I think they have the ability to jump in, particularly around pathology and lab medicine, to advise regulators and policymakers on aspects of care, including AI.
Interesting. We talked about adoption, and it'd be good to sort of touch on that again, because I'm sure you're at the forefront of that. AI in pathology specifically. Obviously, there's some really sort of big names now that have actually been around for a little while and have raised significant capital and at sort of FDA approval level as well. Pathology specifically, obviously, it's a big hype in terms of where AI is having a great impact. Have we seen the adoption specifically in that area now start to become more normalized, where it just feels like absolute? Because you mentioned surgical robotics, where that is just the standard of care. Do we feel like we're getting towards a point where it feels like AI and pathology, people understand its benefits of the workflow, and it's now assumed to be, the standard of a workflow and how it's going to benefit physicians and patients?
I think we see some early adoption. I don't think it's widespread yet.
Right.
But there are some products on the market that are FDA cleared that help. I look at them more as a double check, where they look at tissue and say, this area could be concerning for cancer, or they're diagnostic aids, but they're not diagnostic in and of themselves. It still relies on the pathologist principally and primarily to make that diagnosis. I think that as the technology evolves to where it covers, again, more of the workflow. One of the things that Pictor, I talked about, we are focusing on the virtual staining. Until you get that entire workflow digitized, I think it's hard for physicians or practices just to operationally do pieces in a digital environment. So it's good. I think once we have the entire end-to-end solution together and can offer that, adoption can go forward. I also think there's issues around reimbursement. You start looking at, who's going to pay for, whole slide imaging and scanning and the time it takes to do the different steps, and look at, the health economics related to that. Is it cheaper? Is it not cheaper? Do we save? There's a shortage of histotechnologists right now. If we can let, technology take over some of the work that they did, it might help with that shortage of staff. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to drive adoption that we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, interesting. As Pictor Labs focus on virtual staining, is there a goal or an intent to further develop that into diagnosing from that virtual staining itself, or is that a part of the workflow that you will continue to sort of pass on to, a company that specializes in that?
I really probably should comment on long-term pipeline dreams of the company and what they're looking at. I would say my personal opinion is that I think a pathologist should always be involved as far as doing the end diagnosis and being the one that looks at the picture and decides what's happening there, because there's so many different factors with correlating to the clinical story and the information that you have in an electronic health record, and then just your experience of what you've seen to make the correct diagnosis. That I think AI should remain as an aid and a tool, but not be the primary replacement.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Super interesting. And how are you feeling about the outlook at the moment on the market? Obviously, it's been a really interesting year, and actually, obviously, you've recently moved roles yourself, and moving roles in 2025 is interesting in itself. But what's your sort of general outlook on the pathology market, AI pathology, digital pathology market, and how things are looking for the future?
I think it's positive. Technology is moving forward. I think the products are good. For both our company and others, I see moves to have advancement in that area. You look at investor or funding type. What 30% of healthcare investing is now headed towards AI type companies and innovations. People who embrace that. So
yeah.
Even if you look at drug development, it's all how can you do it faster by using AI and these tools to have to give a bit more proof to what you're going to put forward before you sign a check and cash over. So I also think there's a lot of uncertainty with government regulations, the way the global markets may be responding to different political activities. So honestly, I think it's kind of up in the air where things are going. It's not as good as it was maybe a few years ago, particularly for diagnostics, but in general, I don't think it's a gloom and doom scenario either.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think so I've just actually created the H1 diagnostics report, and I think we see 49% of companies are in growth, about 18% are stable, and then 33% are in decline. So I mean, we've seen it at times as a 50-50, in terms of 50% in decline at times, and that's never great. Then obviously it creates a volatile market, but we are seeing some stability, and we're also seeing investment at the early stage, seed stage. We're also seeing pretty big moves at late stage IPO, right? And that's also positive to see if we can get that balance right. So I think you're right. The macroeconomics right now don't really favour anybody. We could do with just a bit more certainty and stability, but I hold hope that's cleared up within a 12-month period. Like you say, 30% of investment in healthcare going into AI is a really strong number. I've heard of some venture capital firms basically saying that they're reserving 75% of all the capital into for only AI focused companies. So it's it's an interesting balance out there. But like you say, it's not all doom and gloom. I think a lot of people would like to think it's doom and gloom, and they immerse themselves in doom and gloom because it's easy to do that. So there we go. James, thank you so much for coming on and talking about a super interesting topic, and one that will move really quickly, right? Not just the AI into pathology and what Pictor Labs are doing, which sounds incredibly exciting, but also just AI in general and the regulation. There's a lot to unpick there. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, I think it's just moving so fast that everything's going to be outdated so quickly. It's just, again, having enough education to keep up with what's happening and, stay with it. So at least that means there's opportunity for everyone out there.
Yeah, 100%. And if people wanted to pick your brains on how they can stay up to date, what's the best way to contact you? Could they contact you through LinkedIn?
They can, LinkedIn, or go to the Pictor Labs website, and you can find me there as well.
That's awesome. James, thank you so much for your time today. This was super insightful.
I appreciate it, David. Enjoy your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.